How many people did Vlad Impaler kill? Vlad Impaler's reputation as a bloodthirsty tyrant has inspired legends and stories throughout history. His actions have left a lasting impact on the region and continue to fascinate people to this day. Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler, was a ruler of Wallachia in the 15th century. He is infamous for his brutal and sadistic methods of punishment, particularly impaling his enemies on long, sharp stakes. The question of how many people Vlad Impaler killed is one that has long fascinated historians and sparked much debate. To understand the extent of Vlad Impaler's brutality, it is essential to consider the historical context in which he ruled. Wallachia, located in present-day Romania, was constantly under threat from the Ottoman Empire and other neighboring powers. Vlad saw himself as a defender of Christianity against the encroaching Islamic forces, and his methods of punishment were intended to instill fear and deter his enemies. Vlad's preferred method of execution, impalement, was a gruesome and agonizing form of punishment. The victim would be impaled on a long stake, often inserted through the rectum or the abdomen, and left to die a slow and painful death. This method was not only physically torturous, but also served as a psychological deterrent. Due to the lack of comprehensive historical records from Vlad's time, it is challenging to determine an exact number of victims. The estimates vary widely, with some sources claiming that Vlad Impaler killed tens of thousands of people, while others suggest a more conservative figure. It is important to note that many of the accounts of Vlad's atrocities were written by his enemies and may have been exaggerated for propaganda purposes. One of the most notorious incidents associated with Vlad Impaler is the infamous Forest of the Impaled. Vlad ordered the impalement of around 20,000 Turkish prisoners of war during his campaign against the Ottoman Empire. This macabre display was intended to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies and demonstrate his ruthlessness. Vlad Impaler's reputation as a bloodthirsty tyrant has endured throughout history. His actions have inspired countless legends and stories, including the character of Count Dracula in Bram Stoker's famous novel. While the exact number of his victims may never be known, there is no doubt that Vlad's reign of terror left a lasting impact on the region. You may know him as a terrifying blood-sucking vampire, but the real Dracula was a prince named Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, also known as Vlad Țepeș, Vlad the Impaler. But the exploits of Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia, are enough to make you sleep with the lights on indefinitely. Though he was considered something of a hero throughout Christendom in his day for his war against the Muslim world, Vlad had pretty good reason to hate the Turks, at least by his own estimation. When his father, Vlad II Dracula, was still in power, he handed over his two younger sons to the Ottoman Turks as a sign of good faith. Vlad Dracula lived as their pseudo-prisoner for 5 years and fostered a deep hatred for both the Turks and Islam. On the flip side, his father thrived in the environment, becoming friends with Sultan Murad's son, and even converting to Islam. When Vlad came to the throne, his tiny principality was a mess. The crime rate was high, the food supply was low, and trade was virtually non-existent. He knew a country in such a sorry state didn't have a chance of fending off the Ottoman Turks, so he enacted many new, strict laws and enforced incredibly harsh penalties on those who stepped out of line. Vlad got his Impaler moniker in honor of one of these punishments. While he certainly wasn't the first to use this particularly nasty form of torture and death, the sheer number of people he put through this heinous ordeal was extremely noteworthy. When Vlad's victims were impaled, the sharpened wooden stakes were ran through their bodies in various ways. One skilled in this art could even do it in such a way that the pole would slide nicely through much of the body, often from bottom up, without penetrating any vital organs. In this way, the condemned could sometimes lie for several days suspended in midair and left to their agonizing demise. Their remains were often left as a cautionary reminder to Vlad's subjects. Reportedly, sometimes their agonizing deaths served as a full show for Vlad while he and guests were enjoying dinner. It wasn't just his subjects who felt his wrath. When Sultan Mehmed II sent emissaries inquiring why Vlad hadn't coughed up his non-Muslim tribute yet, the seething Dracula explained he was all tapped out thanks to a recent war with Hungary. He then questioned why the ambassadors hadn't removed their turbans as a sign of respect when they approached him. They replied it wasn't customary for them to do so. That didn't sit too well with Dracula. He ordered his guards to seize the emissaries and nail their turbans to their heads. The Turks died a horribly painful death. Vlad sent them back to Mehmed II with a little note asking that he never sent such uncouth ambassadors to his court again. Things were about to get real in 1462. Vlad and his troops crossed the Danube wreaking havoc wherever they went. He wrote a letter about this on February 2, 1462 to the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus, stating, "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived at Oblasica and Nabasilo, where the Danube flows into the sea. We killed 23,884 Turks, without counting those whom we burned in homes, or the Turks whose heads were cut by our soldiers. Thus, Your Highness, you must know that I have broken the peace." In response, Sultan Mehmed II's troops, led by Hamza Pasha, crossed the Danube River, moving closer to Wallachia. Vlad sent decoys suffering with everything from the bubonic plague, leprosy and tuberculosis into the enemy's encampments as a form of biological warfare and employed a scorched earth campaign. He had far fewer troops than the Turks, who came with an army of about 90,000, and depended on guerrilla warfare tactics. By June 16, 1462, the Turks were just outside the Wallachian capital of Targovist. Vlad decided a surprise attack with the purpose of assassinating Mehmed II was his best bet. It wasn't just his subjects who felt his wrath. When Sultan Mehmed II sent emissaries inquiring why Vlad hadn't coughed up his non-Muslim tribute yet, the seething Dracula explained he was all tapped out thanks to a recent war with Hungary. He then questioned why the ambassadors hadn't removed their turbans as a sign of respect when they approached him. They replied it wasn't customary for them to do so. That didn't sit too well with Dracula. He ordered his guards to seize the emissaries and nail their turbans to their heads. The Turks died a horribly painful death. Vlad sent them back to Mehmed II with a little note asking that he never send such uncouth ambassadors to his court again. Things were about to get real. In 1462, Vlad and his troops crossed the Danube wreaking havoc wherever they went. He wrote a letter about this on February 2, 1462 to the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus, stating, "I have killed peasants, men and women, old and young, who lived at Oblasica and Nabasilo, where the Danube flows into the sea. We killed 23,884 Turks, without counting those whom we burned in homes, or the Turks whose heads were cut by our soldiers. Thus, Your Highness, you must know that I have broken the peace." In response, Sultan Mehmed II's troops, led by Hamza Pasha, crossed the Danube River, moving closer to Wallachia. Vlad sent decoys suffering with everything from the bubonic plague, leprosy and tuberculosis into the enemy's encampments as a form of biological warfare and employed a scorched earth campaign. He had far fewer troops than the Turks, who came with an army of about 90,000, and depended on guerrilla warfare tactics. By June 16, 1462, the Turks were just outside the Wallachian capital of Targovist. Vlad decided a surprise attack with the purpose of assassinating Mehmed II was his best bet.